On Father's Day, my daughter Hannah handed her stepfather a velvet box across my dining table. The kind of box you only see in jewelry stores, heavy with expectation. Mark opened it with the smug slowness of a man who already knew what waited inside. A Rolex, stainless steel and gold, gleaming in the afternoon light like it had been made for his wrist alone. He slipped it on immediately, turning it this way and that, admiring the weight. The whole table murmured approval. My nephew even whistled low, and my sister Margaret forced a smile she didn't mean. Then Hannah turned to me. No box, no ribbon. Just a folded lottery ticket she slid across the table like a diner check. "That's all you deserve," she said, smiling sharp enough to cut. "But if you win, don't forget half of it is mine." Silence spread over the room. Forks hovered above plates. My sister's eyes dropped to her lap. Tommy coughed into his glass, and my grandson shifted uncomfortably. Nobody looked at me. Only Mark, with his expensive watch now ticking smugly on his wrist, let out a laugh. Not a belly laugh, not even genuine amusement. Just that quiet, satisfied chuckle that says, "Yes, this is the natural order of things." I smoothed the ticket flat against the tablecloth. My hand was steady, though inside I felt every nerve pulling tight. "Very thoughtful," I said evenly. "It's a joke, Dad," Hannah added, as if that made it better. "Don't take it so seriously." But it wasn't a joke. Not to me. For years I worked double shifts at the garage. Rebuilt engines until my fingers split and calloused. Missed birthdays and Christmas mornings because the rent needed paying, or because tuition deadlines didn't wait. I bought her first car outright. Paid every penny of her college. Co-signed for her first apartment. Every sacrifice I made built the life she lives now. And here I sat, watching her beam at a man who had walked into her life halfway through it, sliding an $18,000 watch onto his wrist, while I was handed a lottery ticket bought with the loose change in her purse. The meal dragged on, but I barely tasted it. The roasted chicken might as well have been cardboard, the pie ash on my tongue. The laughter at the table, shallow, brittle, pressed against me like a weight. Hannah chatted with Mark about their summer plans, about the trip to Napa he wanted to take her on, about how real generosity should be celebrated. Each word felt aimed at me. When they finally left, the silence in the house was a relief. Car doors slammed, engines started, voices faded. I sat alone at the table, the lottery ticket still under my palm. A joke, she'd called it. But it wasn't a joke. It was a verdict. I poured myself a bourbon, just one, and stared at the numbers. Rows of digits printed on cheap paper, a stranger's promise of luck. I traced them with my finger, over and over, committing them to memory. Tomorrow I'd check them. Not because I believed in fate, no, I'd long stopped believing in gifts from the universe, but because the irony of it was too sharp to ignore. I thought about her words, about the smirk she'd worn as she tossed me the ticket like scraps to a dog. "That's all you deserve." My own daughter. My little girl who once clung to my leg in grocery store aisles, who used to beg me to throw her in the air until my arms ached, who cried on my shoulder the day her mother died. That little girl was gone. In her place was a woman who measured love in dollars and watches, who laughed at the father who had given her everything. That night I couldn't sleep. I sat by the kitchen window, the house dark except for the soft hum of the fridge. The lottery ticket lay on the table in front of me. Worthless, most likely, but still a symbol of what she thought I was worth. A cruel joke she believed would never matter. But jokes have a way of turning. Tomorrow, I told myself, I'll check. And if the universe has even a shred of humor left in it, Hannah is going to learn a lesson she'll never forget. The next morning, the house felt colder than usual. I sat at the kitchen table, the lottery ticket flattened beside my coffee cup, steam curling into the quiet. The numbers stared back at me like some kind of taunt. I told myself I didn't care, that it was just a piece of paper, nothing more. But my hand still reached for the remote. The television blinked on. The state lottery results scrolled across the bottom of the screen in bright yellow font. My eyes traced the digits one by one. At first, I thought I was misreading them. Then I checked again. Then again. My chest tightened as the realization set in. Every single number lined up. $80 million. The mug slipped in my grip, spilling coffee across the table. I stared at the mess but couldn't move, the ticket still pinched between my fingers. For years I'd laughed at the idea of luck. I'd worked too hard, scraped too long, to ever believe in miracles. And yet here it was, staring me in the face. 80 million reasons to breathe differently. But it wasn't joy that came first. It was anger. I remembered the way Hannah tossed the ticket at me, how she smirked and said, "That's all you deserve." I remembered the gleam in Mark's eyes when he fastened that Rolex on his wrist, like he'd already claimed victory over me in some game I hadn't agreed to play. Now I held the winning card, and for the first time in a long time, I felt something sharpen inside me. I didn't rush to the lottery office, didn't shout it from rooftops. That would have been her way, loud, flashy, reckless. Instead, I folded the ticket carefully, slid it into an envelope, and tucked it beneath the false bottom of my desk drawer. Let Hannah think it was still just a joke. Let her think she'd humiliated me. She didn't need to know anything. Not yet. The rest of the day blurred by. I went about my usual errands. Groceries, post office, a stop at the pharmacy. The whole time, my mind buzzed with the weight of that ticket hidden in my house. At the market, the cashier asked if I wanted to try my luck with the new scratch-offs. I almost laughed. If only you knew. That evening, the phone rang. "Hannah." "Hey, Dad," she said casually, as though yesterday hadn't happened. "Just checking in. Did you have fun at dinner?" I let the pause stretch before answering. "Sure," I said flatly. She didn't notice. Or maybe she didn't care. Good. Mark loved his watch. You should have seen the way he showed it off to his buddies this morning. It meant a lot to him, you know? I could hear the pride in her voice, the way she glowed over his happiness. Not once did she ask if I'd liked my gift. Not once did she mention me. "Glad he enjoyed it," I replied. There was a brief silence. Then she added, almost as an afterthought, "Oh, and did you check your ticket yet? Who knows, maybe you got lucky." I swallowed, the envelope heavy in my mind. "Not yet," I lied. She laughed. "Well, don't forget, if you win, half of it's mine. After all, I bought it." I said nothing, just listened to her laugh fade into the background as she said goodbye and hung up. That night, I couldn't shake her voice. The entitlement, the certainty that whatever I had was hers by default. She had no idea that the ground beneath her feet had already shifted. I went to my study, locked the door, and opened the drawer again. I stared at the envelope, at the thin paper inside that had changed everything. This wasn't about money anymore. Not really. $80 million wouldn't buy back the daughter I lost. It wouldn't erase the look in her eyes when she chose to humiliate me. But it could give me something else. Control. For years, I'd let her dictate the terms. What she needed. What she expected. What she thought I owed her. She took and I gave because that's what fathers do. But now the balance had shifted. She thought she'd mocked me with a useless slip of paper. Instead, she'd handed me the sharpest weapon I'd ever held. I sat there in the dim light of my desk lamp, the house quiet around me, and felt the cold clarity settle in. Hannah wanted to teach me my worth. She had, and now it was my turn. Tomorrow, I thought, the game begins. The morning after, I woke before the sun. Old habits, years of rising early for work, didn't fade just because I was retired. I brewed coffee, the familiar smell filling the kitchen, and stood by the window watching the neighborhood stir awake. Sprinklers ticked across manicured lawns. A jogger in bright sneakers passed by. Ordinary sounds of an ordinary morning. But nothing felt ordinary anymore. The envelope in my desk drawer weighed on me, though it barely weighed an ounce. Inside sat a ticket that could change lives, destroy lives, and rebuild them again. 80 million. Enough to erase every worry I'd ever had. Enough to feed Hannah's entitlement for the rest of her days, if I let it. But I wouldn't. By mid-morning, Hannah called again. I almost didn't answer, but curiosity got the better of me. "Dad," she said brightly, "I was just thinking, you know how you've been saying your house is too big for you? Maybe it's time to start thinking about downsizing." My jaw tightened. Why would I do that? Well, she said, her tone careful, rehearsed. It's a lot of house for one person, and it's old. Wouldn't it be nice to move somewhere warmer? Maybe a condo, less maintenance. And what would I do with this place? I asked. You could sell it, she said simply. It'd be good money, and Mark and I could help you with the process. We've been talking to some people who… I cut her off. Who asked you to start talking to people about my house? A pause, just long enough to confirm what I already knew. No one, she said quickly. I'm just trying to help, Dad. You worry too much. But her voice carried that same smugness I'd heard at dinner. The same undertone of you're slipping, you need us now. I'm fine here, I said. This house isn't going anywhere. She sighed, a little too dramatically. Okay, just think about it. We only want what's best for you. When she hung up, I sat in the quiet, the phone heavy in my hand. The lies were too transparent, the manipulation too obvious. They weren't worried about me. They were circling like vultures, waiting for me to stumble, to sign something, to give them what they thought they were owed. That afternoon, I pulled out an old notepad and started making lists. It had been years since I'd had to think strategically, but the skills came back quick. Step 1, protect the ticket. Step 2, prepare for Hannah's next move. Step 3, make sure when the trap snapped shut, she'd have no way out. I thought about the safe in the basement, the one she didn't know about. A heavy steel box bolted to the concrete, hidden behind a stack of old boxes. Inside it, I kept things that mattered. The deed to the house, insurance policies, savings bonds, a few pieces of jewelry that had belonged to her mother. That safe had guarded my life for decades. Now it would guard something more dangerous. That evening, I moved the ticket. I slipped it from the envelope, checked the numbers one last time, and placed it inside the safe alongside the deed. I spun the dial slowly, listening to the satisfying click of steel locking against steel. Upstairs, the phone rang again. Hannah's voice came through the receiver, this time less cheerful, more probing. Dad, did you check the ticket yet? No, I lied again. She laughed lightly, but the sound carried a sharp edge. Well, don't forget who bought it. If you win, you know it's not just yours. I didn't answer. Silence stretched until she filled it. Anyway, Mark says we should all go out for dinner next week. His treat. You'll come, right? Sure, I said, though I had no intention of sitting at a table with them again so soon. After I hung up, I sat in the dark for a long time, the safe below my feet, her voice still ringing in my ears. Hannah thought she was clever. She thought she was laying groundwork, planting seeds in my mind about selling the house, about sharing money, about how helpless I supposedly was. But she had no idea I was already 2 steps ahead. The next morning, I made my way to the bank. I didn't cash the ticket. Not yet. Instead, I spoke quietly to a manager I'd known for years. Discreet arrangements, additional accounts, a safe deposit box, paperwork to ensure that no one but me had access. The manager didn't ask questions, and I didn't offer answers. By the time I left, the plan had begun to take shape. Walking back to my car, the summer heat pressed down heavy. I could feel the sweat on my back, the sun burning through my shirt. But underneath it all was a different kind of heat. Controlled. Focused. Hannah had made her move. She thought she'd put me in my place with a cruel joke and a scrap of paper. But now I had 80 million reasons to show her exactly who she was dealing with. And I wasn't going to raise my voice. I wasn't going to beg or plead. I was going to wait. Watch. Let her build her plans brick by brick. And then I was going to knock it all down with one quiet push. By the end of the week, Hannah and Mark showed up at my house uninvited. I heard the crunch of tires on gravel before the knock at the door. Hannah breezed in with that false brightness she wore like perfume. Mark trailing behind with his Rolex glinting under the hallway light. Dad, you look good, Hannah said, kissing my cheek quickly before looking past me into the house. Still keeping the place spotless. I don't know how you do it. I grunted something non-committal and stepped aside. Mark wandered straight into the living room like he owned it, studying the framed photos on the mantel. His voice carried that mix of curiosity and calculation. "You ever think about how much this place would go for on the market?" he asked casually. "Not once," I answered flatly. Hannah laughed, though it came out thin. "Mark's just curious. He's been talking to a realtor friend. It's crazy how much property values have gone up. You could be sitting on a small fortune." "I already am," I thought. Instead, I said, "I'm not going anywhere." Her smile faltered for half a second before she recovered. "Of course, Dad. No rush. Just, it's good to think ahead." We sat down, but it wasn't really a visit. It was reconnaissance. Hannah wandered into my kitchen, opening cupboards as though admiring the organization. Mark lingered near my study, his eyes flicking toward the door. I noticed every move, every glance. They thought they were subtle. They weren't. When Hannah finally sat across from me, she folded her hands, her voice softening in that rehearsed way she used when she wanted something. "Dad, we just want to make sure you're comfortable, that you're taken care of." "I've been taking care of myself for 70 years, I said. "Don't see why that needs to change now." Her smile thinned again. "Of course, we just worry. What if something happens? Wouldn't it make sense to have a plan in place? Maybe sign a few things just in case?" There it was, the slip, the angle they'd been circling toward since Father's Day. A signature, a document, access. I leaned back in my chair, feigning weariness. "Maybe. I'll think about it." Her eyes lit up just slightly before she masked it. Mark cleared his throat, trying to look casual, but I saw the way his hand twitched against his knee. They thought the door had cracked open. After they left, I locked it behind them and stood for a long while in the hallway, the smell of Hannah's perfume still hanging in the air. I walked down to the basement, crouched before the safe and spun the dial. The ticket was still there, snug between the deed and the bonds. Untouched, secure. I whispered into the silence, "You're not ready for what's coming." That night, I called my lawyer, Deborah Price. She'd handled everything from my wife's will to the refinancing of this house decades ago. She was discreet, meticulous, and more importantly, loyal. "David," she said warmly when she picked up, "it's been a while. What can I do for you?" I told her enough to make my position clear without giving her every detail. Family pressure, concerns about signatures, the need for tighter protections. She listened without interrupting, then said, "I can draft new power of attorney documents, ones that lock things down so tight no one gets near them without your say-so." "Good," I said. "And Deborah? Keep it quiet, especially if anyone comes asking." She chuckled softly. "You know me better than that." After the call, I sat in the dark with the house settling around me. I thought of Hannah as a child, sitting on my lap while I read her bedtime stories, eyes wide with wonder. I thought of the first time she scraped her knee and cried until I carried her inside. Somewhere along the line, that little girl had been replaced with someone else. Someone colder. Someone who measured love in luxury watches and bank balances. But I wasn't going to shout or beg or demand she see me differently. That would give her power. No, my strength would be in silence, in patience. They thought they were circling prey. They hadn't realized yet they were walking into a trap. I poured myself another bourbon and sat by the window, the neighborhood dark except for the occasional glow of porch lights. The Rolex ticked in my memory, Hannah's voice echoing. "That's all you deserve." I smiled to myself, though there was no joy in it. "We'll see about that." 2 days later, I got the first real confirmation of what I'd already suspected. Not from Hannah directly, but from my neighbor, Mrs. Parker. She's 83, still sharp as a tack, and has a habit of noticing things others overlook. I was trimming the hedges when she called out from her porch. "David, you thinking of selling?" I looked up, puzzled. "Selling what?" "Your house," she said matter-of-factly. "Your daughter was talking to a realtor outside yesterday. Said you were planning to move south, maybe Arizona. Asked what the neighborhood values were like." I set down the clippers slowly. The sun was hot, but I felt something colder settle in my chest. "Is that so?" I said evenly. She seemed real excited, Mrs. Parker added. Didn't sound like a maybe, sounded like a done deal. I thanked her and went inside, my hands shaking only after the door was locked behind me. So there it was, not just idle talk. Hannah was planting seeds, laying the groundwork. To her, my house wasn't a home anymore. It was inventory. That night, I sat in my study with the blinds drawn. I pulled out the notepad again, updated my list. Step 1 had been securing the ticket. Step 2 had been speaking with Deborah. Now step 3 was gathering proof. If Hannah and Mark thought they were going to maneuver me into signing away my life, then I'd need every scrap of evidence when the time came. The next day, I called an old friend, Charlie Miller. We'd worked side by side at the garage decades ago, but he'd gone into private security after retirement. Kept busy installing cameras, alarm systems, that kind of thing. I owed him more than a few beers, but he owed me more years of friendship. Charlie, I said, I need a favor. What kind? Quiet kind. A couple of small cameras. Ones that won't be noticed. There was a pause. This about Hannah? I didn't answer directly. Let's just say I need to know exactly who's walking through my house when I'm not around. He sighed, but I heard the rustle of tools in the background. I'll be by tonight. True to his word, he came after dusk. We sat on the porch drinking beers until the neighborhood settled, then moved inside. He placed 2 pinhole cameras. One in my study, aimed at the desk, and another near the hallway leading down to the basement where the safe sat. Small, invisible, perfect. Anything else? He asked. Not yet, I said. But keep your phone on. The following morning, Hannah called again. She sounded rushed, distracted, like she was speaking between errands. Dad, just checking in. Did you think any more about what we talked about? Downsizing? I said I'd think about it, I replied. Well, don't take too long, she said quickly. These things take time to line up, you know? I let the silence stretch, then asked casually, You talking to someone already? Her laugh came too fast. No, of course not. Just exploring options. I hung up soon after. My blood boiled, but I kept my voice calm. She was lying. I knew it, and soon I'd have proof. That afternoon, I pretended to run errands but doubled back quietly through the side door. The house was still, but voices carried faintly from my study. Hannah and Mark. I told you he's stubborn, Hannah hissed. He'll cave, Mark said. Old men always do. We just need him to think it's his idea. Once he signs, we're set. My heart pounded, but I stayed still, listening from the hallway. Papers shuffled. The creak of my desk chair. Then Hannah again, lower this time. Don't worry, I'll handle him. He won't even see it coming. I slipped back out as quietly as I'd come, walking the block until my breathing calmed. When I returned, they were gone. That night, I reviewed the footage from Charlie's cameras. There they were. Hannah rifling through my desk drawers, Mark crouched near the hallway, his hand brushing along the wall like he was searching for something hidden. Predators circling, too confident to realize the trap was already set. I saved the files to an external drive and locked it in the safe beside the ticket. The irony didn't escape me. The same safe they were desperate to find held not only my fortune, but also the evidence that would destroy their scheme. I sat back in my chair, the house dark, the glow of the monitor fading. For the first time in weeks, I felt calm. Let them think I was slow. Let them think I was blind. The longer they believed it, the harder the fall would be. By the time Sunday rolled around, I decided silence was my sharpest weapon. Let Hannah and Mark believe they were winning. Let them grow confident, careless. That's when people make mistakes. The morning began as it always did. Coffee at the kitchen table, newspaper folded neatly. The house filled with that quiet hum of appliances and settling wood. At 9 sharp, the front door opened without a knock. Hannah breezed in like she owned the place. Mark followed, his cologne thick in the air. Morning, Dad, she sang. We thought we'd drop by. Maybe take you to brunch. I sipped my coffee, eyes on the paper. I already ate. Mark chuckled like he'd been rehearsing it. Always up before the sun, Huh? You should relax more. Enjoy life. His Rolex glinted as he poured himself coffee from my pot without asking. Hannah leaned against the counter, watching me. So, did you check the ticket yet? I folded the paper carefully. No. She tilted her head. Why not? Don't believe in luck, I said. Her smile flickered. Well, maybe you should. Who knows, you could be sitting on a fortune and not even know it. I shrugged. Maybe. The silence stretched long enough for her to push forward. Dad, listen. About the house. Mark's talked to a realtor. Nothing official, just exploratory. But the numbers are incredible. You could cash out big. Move somewhere easier, warmer. You'd thank us later. I looked at her then. Really looked. The eagerness in her eyes wasn't about me. It was about the dollar signs flashing behind them. I set my mug down slowly. Why would I leave this house? I asked. I built it with my own hands. Every beam, every nail. Your mother's memory is in these walls. I buried her from this house. I carried you across this floor when you took your first steps. Why would I walk away from that? Her lips pressed together, the smile slipping. Mark jumped in, voice smooth. Memories don't pay bills, David. Property value does. And with the right paperwork. I cut him off with a look. The kind my old foreman used to give when someone mouthed off in the shop. He shut up quick. Hannah tried again, softer this time. We're just trying to help. We don't want you struggling. I'm not struggling, I said evenly. And I don't need your help. The air thickened. She opened her mouth to argue, then thought better of it. Instead, she smiled that thin, brittle smile and changed the subject. Anyway, we should all go to dinner this week. Mark knows a great steakhouse. His treat. I nodded, though I had no intention of going. Let them think I was pliable. Let them think I was giving ground. When they finally left, I followed them to the window, watching as Hannah climbed into their SUV. Mark's hand resting possessively on her knee as he started the engine. The image sat heavy in my mind. My daughter leaning on him, trusting him, plotting with him, against me. That night, I stayed awake long after the house went dark. Around midnight, I heard the faint creak of the back porch. A shadow moved across the yard. Mark. He lingered near the basement window, peering in, probably hoping to spot the safe. I didn't move, didn't even breathe heavy. I sat in the living room chair, lights off, watching his silhouette through the sheer curtains. After a few minutes, he gave up and disappeared into the dark. I smiled to myself, a cold, humorless smile. The cameras had caught it all. The next morning, I called Deborah again. Draft the documents, I told her. The ones we discussed. Make them airtight. Done, she said. When do you want them ready? Soon, I replied. But not yet. Timing is everything. After I hung up, I went down to the safe, spun the dial and opened it. The ticket lay where I'd left it, the evidence drive beside it. I stared at both for a long time, then closed the steel door with deliberate care. $80 million and hours of footage. One represented everything they wanted. The other represented everything that would bury them. I sat back in my chair upstairs, coffee steaming in my hands, the house filling with sunlight. They thought they had me cornered. They thought I was too old, too tired, too blind. But I wasn't blind. I was patient. And patience, I'd learned long ago, breaks people faster than rage ever could. By Wednesday, their tone shifted. Hannah wasn't just nudging anymore. She was pressing. She showed up mid-afternoon without calling first, a folder tucked under her arm. Dad, she began sweetly. Mark's been helping me with some paperwork. It's nothing complicated, just some preliminary stuff in case you ever decide to sell. No pressure. She laid the folder on my kitchen table, sliding it toward me like a dealer sliding cards across green felt. My fingers rested on the cover, but I didn't open it. What's in it? I asked. Options, she said too quickly. Joint agreements, estimates. Just things to make life easier for you down the road. I studied her face, the eagerness she couldn't quite hide. She wanted me to flip through those pages. Wanted me to sign something without thinking, to surrender control disguised as making life easier. "I'll look at it later," I said, my voice flat. She hesitated. "It'd be better if you—" "Later," I repeated, firmer this time. Her lips tightened, but she forced a smile. "Of course, Dad. No rush." After she left, I carried the folder into my study and locked the door. I opened it slowly, careful not to bend a single page. Inside were draft agreements, joint investment accounts, property evaluations, preliminary sale contracts. My name was printed at the top of every one. Blank signature lines waited at the bottom like open jaws. I read every word. The language was dense, but I knew enough to see through it. Signing anything in there would give them access, maybe not outright, but enough to wedge the door open. Enough to let them start moving pieces around behind my back. I copied every page with Charlie's portable scanner, then slipped the originals back into the folder exactly as I'd found them. When Hannah came sniffing around later, I wanted her to believe I'd never looked. That night I called Deborah. "I have their draft documents," I told her. "Bring them in," she said. "I'll look them over." "No," I replied. "Not yet. I want to play this carefully." She was quiet for a moment. "You're laying a trap." "Exactly." The next day, I drafted my own version of their agreement with Deborah's help. Identical on the surface, same formatting, same language, but with hidden clauses buried deep in the legal jargon. Clauses that ensured any joint account reverted entirely to me at the first sign of coercion or manipulation. Clauses that stripped them of every right they thought they'd secured. When I held the finished papers in my hands, I felt a strange calm. Hannah thought she was clever. Mark thought he was in control. But they were children playing at a game I'd been forced to master decades ago. When bills piled high, when doctors' offices demanded payments I didn't have, when every decision meant survival or collapse. That evening, Hannah called again. Her voice was chipper, but I heard the strain beneath it. "Dad, did you look at the folder?" "I did." I lied. "Still thinking about it." She rushed in, eager. "Well, don't take too long. Mark's already spoken to a couple of people who can move fast once you're ready. You could be in a new place by the end of the summer." I let her spin her fantasies while I stared at the fake agreement spread across my desk. When she finally paused for breath, I said, "You're right. Maybe it's time I start planning ahead." The silence on the other end was electric. Then she laughed, relieved. "I knew you'd see it our way. Can I come by tomorrow? We'll go through everything together." "Tomorrow's fine," I said. After I hung up, I sat in the quiet house with the documents glowing under the lamp. Tomorrow, I'd slide the altered version across the table. Tomorrow, I'd watch her sign her name with a smile, believing she'd just secured her future. She'd have no idea she was signing the rope she'd eventually hang herself with. I closed the folder, locked it in the desk, and leaned back in my chair. The house groaned softly around me, familiar and steady. I thought of my wife, of how she used to say patience was the only weapon that never dulled. Patience, I reminded myself. Let Hannah walk right into it. And when she did, I'd be waiting. Hannah arrived the next afternoon right on schedule, folder in hand, her smile stretched too wide. Mark trailed behind her, his Rolex catching the light like it was mocking me. They didn't even bother with pleasantries this time. She set the folder on my kitchen table, slid into the chair opposite me, and smoothed her hair back like she was preparing for a business meeting. "Okay, Dad," she said, voice rehearsed and cheery. "Let's go through this. It's really straightforward." Mark sat beside her, close enough that their shoulders touched. His arm draped casually across the back of her chair. I could see the calculation in his eyes, the way he leaned forward when I opened the folder. Inside wasn't their draft. It was mine. Deborah's version, identical at first glance, down to the formatting and letterhead, but beneath the surface it was a trap with teeth. I pretended to read slowly, my finger tracing the lines. "Looks clear enough," I murmured. Hannah's relief was almost palpable. "See? Nothing complicated. Just paperwork so we can help manage things when the time comes. Take the stress off your plate." I nodded. Makes sense. Her eyes lit up, and she slid a pen across the table. If you're ready, just sign here. I picked up the pen, rolling it between my fingers. You'll both sign too, right? Of course, Hannah said quickly. I turned the pages deliberately, watching them watch me. Then I leaned forward and signed my name with slow, deliberate strokes. The sound of the pen scratching against paper seemed louder than it should have. Hannah exhaled a little too loudly, then scrawled her own signature beneath mine, Mark following suit. He smirked as he wrote, like a man already counting the money in his pocket. When it was done, Hannah closed the folder with a satisfied slap. That wasn't so bad, was it? You'll see, Dad. This is going to make everything easier. I smiled faintly. I'm sure it will. They left soon after, folder tucked under Hannah's arm like a prize. I stood at the window and watched their SUV pull out of the driveway. Hannah leaned across the console to kiss Mark, her laughter floating faintly even through the glass. I turned away, the smile dropping from my face. Upstairs, in my study, I pulled out the spare copies Deborah had prepared. Exact duplicates of the signed agreement, every clause intact. I placed one in the safe with the ticket, another in a sealed envelope for Deborah, and kept the last in a locked drawer. That night, Hannah called again, giddy. Dad, I can't tell you how relieved I am you finally agreed. Mark and I are going to set up some meetings just to get things rolling. You don't have to worry about a thing. I listened to her excitement, the way her voice vibrated with greed, and said only, glad it makes you happy. After we hung up, I poured myself a bourbon and sat in the dark. My hands didn't shake. My heart didn't race. All I felt was an icy calm. For the first time since Father's Day, the weight shifted. They believed they'd won. Believed I'd bent to their will. But in reality, they'd just signed away any chance they had of controlling me. The papers were a leash, one I held, one they didn't even know was around their necks. 2 days later, Charlie called. Got something you'll want to see. I drove to his place, a modest ranch house on the edge of town. He pulled out a thumb drive and loaded it onto his laptop. Grainy footage filled the screen, my study, just after I'd left for groceries. Hannah and Mark slipped inside, rifling through my drawers, searching. Here, Charlie said, pausing the video. Mark crouched near the hallway again, fingers tapping the wall above the basement stairs. Looking for the safe, I muttered. Charlie nodded. They're not subtle. If you need me to. No, I said. Let them keep looking. I took the footage home, saved it to the drive in my safe. More evidence. More rope. That evening, as I locked the safe, I whispered into the quiet, patience. It wasn't just about money anymore. It hadn't been since the moment she tossed me that ticket with a smirk. This was about respect. About reminding my daughter, and the man who thought he could replace me, that I wasn't some senile old fool to be managed. They thought the game was over, but really it had only just begun. The first crack appeared less than a week later. Deborah called me on a Tuesday morning, her voice calm but edged with amusement. David, she said, your daughter just left my office. I set my coffee down. And she brought in the paperwork you all signed. Wanted me to move things along. Deborah chuckled softly. I told her I'd review everything carefully before proceeding. She was impatient, pushy even. But I'll give her credit, she tried to act like she was running the show. And did she notice the clauses? I asked. Not a chance. She doesn't have the eye for it. Neither does that husband of hers. David, when the time comes, those documents will hold up in any courtroom. You're covered. Good, I said. After I hung up, I sat back in my chair, letting the silence settle. Hannah thought she'd set the gears in motion. She thought the wheels were already turning toward her prize. What she didn't realize was that every step she took only pulled the noose tighter around her neck. That evening, Hannah called. Dad, great news. Deborah's reviewing everything. She says it looks good. I smiled to myself. That so? Yeah. Once it's finalized, Mark and I can help with the accounts, the realtor, all that. You'll barely have to lift a finger. Sounds easy, I said, letting my tone stay neutral. She mistook it for agreement and bubbled on. I'm just glad you finally trusted me enough to let us help. You'll see, this will make life so much simpler for everyone. Of course, I murmured, then hung up before she could push further. The next few days were quiet. Too quiet. I knew the silence wasn't peace. It was plotting. So I waited. By Friday, the call came. Not from Hannah, from Deborah again. She brought Mark this time, she said. Tried to convince me to expedite things. Wanted immediate access to your accounts to lighten your burden. I asked for documentation to prove you requested that. She couldn't produce anything. Mark got angry, raised his voice. I reminded him this was my office, and I don't respond to intimidation. I could almost hear the smile in Deborah's voice. Don't worry, David. They're showing their hand. And they're making mistakes. That night, I poured a bourbon and sat in the dark, reviewing Charlie's latest footage. More late-night visits. More snooping through my study. Mark tapping walls. Hannah pulling open drawers she'd rifled through a dozen times already. But the best clip was from Thursday evening. Hannah stood in my kitchen, speaking into her phone while Mark searched the basement door. Her voice was sharp, impatient. Yes, as soon as the paperwork's finalized, the house will be ours. Don't worry, I've got it under control. He won't even know what happened until it's too late. I paused the video, staring at her frozen face on the screen. My daughter, the little girl I'd once carried on my shoulders at the county fair, now plotting my erasure in my own kitchen. I saved the footage to the drive and leaned back, exhaling slowly. I felt no urge to yell, no surge of rage. Only a cold, steady patience. She was digging her own grave. I just had to let her keep shoveling. On Sunday, they showed up at the house again, uninvited as always. Hannah's smile was stretched thin this time, and Mark carried himself with less patience. Dad, Hannah said, her tone clipped. We really need to talk about moving forward. Deborah's stalling. Maybe it's better if we use someone else. Mark has connections. No, I said simply. Her eyes widened. What do you mean, no? I mean, I said evenly, Deborah handles all my affairs. Always has. Always will. Mark's jaw tightened. She's dragging her feet on purpose. Good, I replied. Better slow than sloppy. Hannah tried to laugh it off, but the sound was brittle. Dad, we're just trying to help. Don't make this harder than it has to be. I looked at her then, my gaze steady. I'm not making anything hard. You are. For the first time in weeks, she faltered. Her eyes darted toward Mark, who shifted uncomfortably but said nothing. They left soon after, frustration simmering just beneath their smiles. I stood at the window and watched them go, the SUV's taillights fading down the street. Back inside, I opened the safe and stared at the ticket, at the drive, at the signed papers. All the weapons I needed locked away, waiting. They thought the battle was almost won. But really, they hadn't even realized the war had already ended. The trap snapped shut on a Wednesday morning, quiet and clean. Deborah called first. David, she said. They tried to file the papers without you present. Walked into the clerk's office with your supposed authorization. Said you'd given them full access. The clerk called me immediately. I went down there myself. My grip tightened on the phone. And they waved those papers like a golden ticket. Demanded immediate transfer of your property and accounts. But here's the thing, they signed the altered version. The one that gives you full rights and voids, there's the moment they act without your consent. I leaned back in my chair, the bourbon in my other hand untouched. David, she continued, they committed fraud in broad daylight. There are witnesses, security footage. The clerk was so rattled she made copies of everything. If you want, I can take this to the district attorney tomorrow. I was silent a moment. No, not yet. Let them twist a little longer. That evening, Hannah called. Her voice trembled under the surface. Dad, there's been a misunderstanding. Deborah's making this harder than it needs to be. A misunderstanding? I asked calmly. Yes, she said quickly. We were just trying to speed things up. Make life easier for you. Nobody meant any harm. Speed things up for who? I asked. Silence. Then a forced laugh. For you, of course. I let the pause stretch until it broke her composure. Dad, please, you don't understand. This is for the best. If you just... No, I said, my voice low, final. I understand perfectly. The line went dead quiet. Then she whispered, You checked the ticket, didn't you? I didn't answer. I didn't need to. The next day, I visited Deborah's office. She handed me a folder. Inside were affidavits, witness statements, and the signed documents, all damning. One called David. They'll be in court before the month's out. I studied the papers, then closed the folder. Not court. Not yet. Deborah raised an eyebrow. Then what? Something quieter. That afternoon, I met Charlie at the diner. Over coffee, I slid him a drive with weeks of footage. Hannah and Mark rifling through my drawers, whispering about the house, Mark prowling outside at night. Insurance, I said. Just in case. Charlie nodded. What do you want me to do with it? Hold on to it. If anything happens to me, it goes straight to Deborah. His eyes softened. You sure you don't want to burn them now? I'll burn them, I said. But on my terms. The following weekend, Hannah and Mark showed up again. This time, they didn't bother with fake smiles. Dad, Hannah said sharply, we need access to those accounts. This stalling is ridiculous. You can't manage everything yourself anymore. I leaned back in my chair, calm as the bourbon in my glass. Funny, I've managed just fine for 70 years. Mark stepped forward, his jaw tight. This isn't about you. This is about your family. I met his stare. You're not my family. The words hit harder than I expected. Hannah flinched like I'd struck her. For a moment, I almost saw the little girl she used to be, before greed twisted her. But the moment passed. Her eyes hardened again. You'll regret this, she spat. No, I said softly. You will. They stormed out, the slam of the door rattling the frame. I sat in the silence afterward, the house steady around me. My wife's photo watched from the mantel. I raised my glass toward it. It's done. The next morning, I drove to the state lottery office. The clerk verified the ticket, eyes widening as the machine confirmed the win. Paperwork was signed. Accounts established. $80 million transferred into my name alone. I didn't call Hannah. Didn't call anyone. I let the silence do the talking. A week later, she showed up at my door, face pale, Mark nowhere in sight. Dad, please, she whispered. I made a mistake. I didn't mean. I held up a hand. You meant every word. Tears welled in her eyes. Just give me another chance. I opened the door wider, not to let her in, but to let her see the packed suitcases by the stairs. I'm leaving for a while, I said. Traveling. Enjoying what's mine. Don't call me. Don't come here. If you try, Deborah will handle it. And you know what she has. Her face crumpled. Dad. But I closed the door before she could finish. I walked back to the study, opened the safe, and stared at the empty space where the ticket had been. The deed, the footage, the documents, all still there, locked tight. $80 million couldn't buy back my daughter. But it could buy me peace. And peace, I realized, was worth more than forgiveness. I poured a final bourbon, sat in my chair by the window, and let the silence settle like a crown. The game was over, and I had won.